I got it. Good afternoon. Sorry we started the discussion part of this session late, but two excellent and very valuable presentations from our two guest speakers. Let me get right into the discussion with my friend and colleague, Dr. Bassma Kodmani. Bassma, among the many other things you do, you have been for a long time the head of the Arab Reform Initiative, which is a very valuable coalition of Arab think tanks that has been working on the social, economic, political, and gender deficits and crises in the Arab world long before the Arab uprisings took place. I wonder if you could share with us now, almost 3 years into these troubled Arab uprisings, these major upheavals, how you see the big picture. No doubt these are long processes. There's been limited successes in some places, huge setbacks in others. How would you describe the main momentum moving forward? Are there points of hope? What are things that you would highlight in this complex view? Bassma.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I enjoy very much and look forward to any meeting organized by the Körber Foundation. So I have the privilege of being a speaker this afternoon. The Arab Reform Initiative is a initiative launched by Arab think tanks. Prince Turki is one of the active founding members with the Center for Islamic Research and Studies in Saudi Arabia. We worked indeed on reform, and the Arab uprisings, yes, took us all by surprise. Yet, the movement that was inside Arab societies, that came to express itself in a common pattern across the region, then is showing us what the structures of each society are. And I am optimistic, very optimistic on what Arab societies are producing in terms of innovative ways of mobilizing, of organizing, and of learning quickly how a democratic protest should be organized. It is not yet organized properly. I think we've had resets in both cases, in Tunisia and in Egypt, resets that restarted the process, but I think the element of hope is there is as much to produce from the top, from the government level, as there is to produce from the society's level. And that is occurring, I think, in perhaps quicker within society than it is happening at the government level. And these two levels need to be observed very carefully, because what will not come from government will come from the society, and shortcomings will not be tolerated. Return to authoritarianism will not be tolerated. Now we are all under the fear of polarization. And in this case, I would like to say, when I listen to Prime Minister Jebali, he says we need the strong support, we need the trust, we need decisive measures to protect these processes. I tend to say there is one component of these uprisings that has turned very sour, bloody, and that is Syria. And that this particular process, if it were to be left to drift the way it has drifted, I think it is going to retrospectively tell us this region was not prepared to move towards democracy, and we will tend to forget all of these positive elements that came out in the two speeches we heard, both by Prince Turki and Prime Minister Jebali. Strong elements of hope, and give time to organizing societies, because this is all about organizing societies along new terms. We have to find those new terms of relations among ourselves, and then I think connect across countries, and I think we'll come back to Syria in a while.
Well, I certainly want to come back to you on Syria in a moment, but let me turn to my colleague, Dr. Volker. These last 3 years have also seen dramatic changes in terms of regional and international relations, balance of power in the region, U.S. withdrawal, actions by different regional players, removal of some dictators that had been around for a long time, ending just the last few days in a sort of a positive breakthrough, which is also historic, potentially, of the Iranian P5+1 nuclear deal. So when you step back as an analyst of sort of the regional international politics of the Middle East, looking at these tumultuous 3 years and looking a bit forward, what are the main patterns? What are the main things we should be paying attention to? What are some points of hope?
Well, maybe we have to put the Arab revolutions and transformations into a more historical framework and remind ourselves that most revolutions in the world went along with regional turmoils. I mean, it has never happened that you had a revolution in one country, it was straight transforming into democracy and everything was fine and everything else, everything around or everybody around was accepting it. So what we are seeing now is that Bassma already pointed to Syria as sort of the core of the whole regional turmoil here, that we have at least two main battlefields, if I can say so. One military battlefield where peaceful local uprising, that is in Syria, has been transformed into a regionalized and partly internationalized war. And Egypt having become a political battlefield where a lot of regional forces are trying to show their force. And the main contenders in the region being Saudi Arabia and Iran, and both, I would say, not acting very wisely. The one introducing militias like Hezbollah into Syria, the others fostering, I would say, I'm sure my friend Turki Faisal will disagree, fostering sectarianism and confessionalism in the region. And all that now overlaid by the fear of very, very many forces that the Americans, that the United States will change allegiances and partly withdraw from the region. And we are seeing the good news, which you spoke about, that we're having a diplomatic breakthrough, an initial diplomatic breakthrough on Iran, even being translated negatively by some regional forces who say, oh, that's just another sign that the Americans are changing their allegiances, they will reach out to Iran, they will leave the Gulf states on the Arab side of the Persian Gulf alone, and they will let us down, and we in Saudi Arabia or wherever will lose in position. So we're having this mixed turmoil of regional and international factors coming together, and I think you say, where should we look to? I think first we shouldn't delude ourselves by expressions which we used to use in 2011, like Arab Spring, which sort of gave the whole revolution much too seasonal a flavor. Sort of thought it's of spring, and after 3 months it will be over, and everything will be blossoming in summer, and that underestimated, I think, the historical dimension. B, we should be aware that this turmoil will, in one way or other, sweep through the entire region with no state being immune. Of course, states will react to it differently, have different resources, different political skills to act with it, but it's there. This striving for human dignity, which Prime Minister Jebali spoke of. We have that in Saudi Arabia, we have it in Iran, we have it in Morocco, we have it in Algeria, we have it everywhere in the region, so no country will be really immune. And then we in Europe, of course, have to think about how can we help transformations. Maybe at some point we have to concentrate on those states that really seem to be on a transforming path. Concentrate on that in order to shape at least islands of peaceful transformations. Tunisia certainly would be an example.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Volker. I'm going to come back to you, Bassma, and I'm favoring Bassma and Volker in the first period, of course. Our other two guests had a chance to make initial remarks. But Bassma, let me turn to you under your hat of being obviously a Syrian, a scholar and a Syrian activist, and you were part of the Syrian opposition in the early period and a spokesperson for the Syrian opposition. How do you see the Syrian opposition, first of all, reading the situation both vis-a-vis the chemical weapons deal, Assad regime's changing fortunes, both positive and negative in a sense, the rise of a new jihadist movement against which the US and others Europe have taken very important positions, and leading towards the Geneva II meeting where the opposition is expected to be present and perhaps begin some negotiating process. How do you, if you were putting yourself still in the position of that sort of divided and difficult opposition, how would you describe what it looks like from there?
We have to, I think, distinguish between efforts to unite the political opposition and efforts to unite military groups on the ground. They come from two different sources, I would say. The political opposition has made important progress, significant process over the last 6 months, or 4 months, 5 months, to come together, to express itself with some common voice, and eventually came to express a very clear position on, yes, the political process is something we want, and it is on the terms of this negotiation process that the opposition has meant to express itself, has come out explicitly in favor of a negotiation based on the terms of the Geneva I document concluded last year and signed by Russia and the United States. And therefore, if Geneva I is indeed the terms of reference for bringing together the parties in Geneva II, we need to see that commitment by the two great powers absolutely clear. For now, we do not have a clear indication of that, but the political opposition has come out clearly in favor of that, has brought in the Kurdish opposition, has formed a provisional government which is yearning for support in order to show, at least in some parts of Syria, wherever it can work, that it can deliver something to the people. And I think this is critical for the opposition to show that it is able to do something. Now here is where comes the outside support. The opposition has no means of its own, needs the financial support, and on the ground needs to connect with the groups that are fighting the regime. We have seen very interesting, and I really want to just point to one example. We see in areas and local groupings that there is a big gathering of opposition forces on the ground that come under some Islamic front. This Islamic front is very diverse. Yes, it has groups calling for an Islamic state, but many Syrians are saying, well, let them call for an Islamic state. If they come to elections, it will be played out politically. But the important part here is we do have among these groups the moderate Islamist groups, and I'm pointing to the Muslim Brothers in particular. We're joining the democratic groups. Let us not call them democratic, let's say pro-democracy, those who are committed to a democratic outcome in Syria. These groups are coming together to say, this is the basis of what we want for Syria. Now that has to be encouraged. If that is not encouraged, the opposition cannot bring these groups on its own. It needs the help of outside parties. I want just to end on this. As much as the support of countries, friendly countries, and they are in the Gulf, they are the ones who have been generously supporting this revolution. However, the more they are involved, the more polarized the regional picture is. I am one of those who wish to see détente, who wish to see appeasement between the big countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, because détente is what will bring to Syria less of a depolarization and also more of an independence of Syrian decision-making. If we don't have that beginning of a détente, we will not be able to act as Syrians. We will still be hostage to the agendas of countries who are not necessarily playing proxy wars always, but they have their interests. Syria is Syria, Saudi Arabia is Saudi Arabia, Iran has its own interests. Where we need to see something happen is containing the impact of countries around, because that is the way we can go to Geneva. Geneva is a complex process, very complex process. But if we create that pillar towards which the groups that are moderate can look to. And I think that is how the shift towards creating a reality of what a moderate agenda for tomorrow's Syria can be, definitely that is the beginning of how you can sideline any of the extremist groups. You have to act politically, not only security-wise by talking about fighting terror.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bassma. Before turning to Prime Minister Jebali and Prince Turki, I want to direct also a question again to Volker. As a student of the Middle East and as a student of political science, I want to ask you about the Levant. This area which has effectively fallen apart, national disintegration, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, states that are failed or failing in different conditions. Much has been said about Sykes-Picot and the fall of Sykes-Picot, and will there be something new coming forward? But how do you describe this disintegration? How do you see it playing out? And what can be done in such a condition where you do not have a clear nation state, you don't have viable states that are up and running? What can be done with the people of the region or regionally, internationally, to try to address such a collapse of order as we have today in Syria, but obviously Iraq and Lebanon is also part of that?
I wouldn't go too far and say that Sykes-Picot is already done and gone with the winds of history. Borders, even post-colonial borders tend to be much more stable than people assume, even people who challenge these borders. But there is a real risk. And the risk is that if the war in Syria carries on, 2.5 years is already too long, but if it carries on another 2.5 years, then Syria will fragment, and if Syria fragments, then the post-Ottoman, post-World War I, Sykes-Picot order, whatever you call it, will also fragment. And we are seeing it happening at the borders of Syria, which are becoming blurred. I mean, take the region between your country, Lebanon, let's say the Beqa, and sort of the western states, the western towns in Syria, Homs. I mean, there is a whole border region where you really don't know who is in charge. Is it the Syrian army? Is it Syrian militias? Is it Hezbollah? Who is it? So borders are becoming blurred. Borders are becoming blurred in the Kurdish populated areas of Syria. Are they being controlled by the PKK? Are they being controlled by Mr. Barzani from Erbil? Are they controlled halfway by the Syrian opposition, halfway by Damascus? Borders are becoming blurred. The same is happening at the borders to Iraq, I mean the southeastern borders of Syria. So the more that continues, this order which has been put together after the end of with the end of the Ottoman Empire could actually fragment. And that will mean a lot. It will mean that other nation states or quasi-nation states in the region are threatened, Iraq in the first place, but I think also Jordan and maybe some others. And it will also mean, and that should concern us a lot, that the very idea of a multi-confessional, multi-ethnic state in the Middle East will not only be challenged, but will probably be gone. Syria, as bad as it was governed, was always multi-ethnic and multi-confessional. And if Syria splits, if it fragments, then that idea will be gone, and other states, smaller states that are also multi-confessional, like Jordan, like Iraq, will certainly be threatened here. And then it's a question, will anybody put it together again? Syria will not just fall into pieces, as some people hope, and then after a generation you can put the jigsaw puzzle together again. That will not happen. If it fragments, it will explode. And sometimes it's sad fun to Google for certain concepts and expressions. Last time I Googled the concept New Sykes-Picot in Arabic, Sykes-Picot Jadid. You find more than 60,000 entries in Google. A lot of people writing about the powers of the day, which now being, of course, not Britain and France, but the United States and Russia and probably Iran and Saudi Arabia, China or others, the European Union, powers of the day sort of reordering the region and making a new Sykes-Picot. And I think that is nonsense. No one will come and put the region together again. So if Sykes-Picot fragments, if the current state order fragments, then we will have to live not with a new order in the Middle East, but with disorder in the Middle East. And everybody who is dreaming of dismantling Syria as it is should be aware of that the alternative is not a new, better order, but the alternative to the bad order, to the artificial borders of Sykes-Picot, is disorder. So what to do about it? It sounds very simple, but it's very complicated. It is stop the war in Syria. Only if we stop the war in Syria, even if it would mean a temporary administrative division of the country in a zone ruled by Mr. Assad from Damascus and a zone ruled by the opposition in the north and the east, would probably make it better for humanitarian reasons, because refugees could return or wouldn't have to become refugees, and humanitarian supplies could come in. For political reasons, because even in government-controlled areas, people would take back to the street, and of course for strategic reasons, because the regional order would probably not fragment. So stopping the war sounds easy, I know, is the greatest challenge now, and I think the only thing that would prevent all this fragmentation and further humanitarian catastrophes in Syria and around.
Thank you very much, Volker. I would like to address a question to Prime Minister Jebali. I will do it in Arabic. So, دولة الرئيس جبالي.
I would like to ask you, Mr. Jebali, a question concerning political Islam. Hezbollah in Tunisia is one of the most renowned parties. Political Islam has been crowned with success in Tunisia compared to its experiences in Egypt. Now, based on your experiences in the 2.5 past years, what is your interpretation of what happens to the MB in Egypt? And how do you see the future of another movement in Egypt? Will they comprehend the challenges that Muslim Brotherhoods have faced in other regions or in other countries? Also, what is the connection of your party with GCC countries? We know there is some tension between you and the GCC, so how do you see, what's your opinion on all those topics? This categorization, political Islam or non-political Islam, to be honest, I don't understand it. In Tunisia, I have a people which have carried out revolution. It needs answers to urgent issues concerning society and economy, and this is the spark of the revolution in Tunisia. This spark was fueled by dictatorial policies, but the main problem in Tunisia is this huge social gap, the huge gap between different social strata and different economic conditions and regions. So the people has no interest in ideological polarization. This is not our issue. As a Tunisian citizen, I don't care to wake up and say I'm a Muslim or non-Muslim, I pray or I do not pray. This is of no interest to me whatsoever as a Tunisian citizen. Of course, culture is important, but the main concern of any Tunisian citizen is being able to go to work, being healthy, receiving enough financial support for his family. So, all political parties, regardless of their political affiliation, the party which would respond to the people's demands is the party which would be crowned with success. Parties which would tend or resort to violence and ideological polarization would, by time, diminish because it would go against the will of the Tunisians. We, in Tunisia, like to simplify things. We do not go down the road of political, cultural, religious polarization because this road does not lead to any good. So, right now, we see before us many examples which substantiate my point. This is why the Al-Nahda movement, since its establishment in 1981, adopted the policy of political consensus and negotiations, so that we can come up with a social model which can be considered as moderate, a model which encompasses all different ideologies. So during this political process we are going through, we are not dealing with crisis as you have described it. We deem them interactions. We call them interactions rather. Transitions, if I may, in our society, happening in our society. We are practicing democracy, if I may say so, practicing the culture of respecting others. Democracy in France, for instance, or the revolution, the French Revolution needed one whole century to achieve stability. So we are undergoing a phase of transition, gradual transition, because we are talking about traditions and culture that needs to be nurtured. In the Nahda movement, we tend to focus on political consensus, even if it takes 10 or 15 years, so that we can get closer to each other, so we can coexist in peace, so that we can build our country and consolidate democracy. This is what I see happening in Tunisia. I heard a lot of talk about Syria. Unfortunately, Syria is now a battlefield. And I hope all disputes between major regional and international powers would be settled. The same applies to Egypt. We in Tunisia would like to refrain from getting engaged in any ideological conflict. So we would only welcome support for our political goals.
Going over to the Q&A session. We'll take 10 minutes extra in the session, so we'll end around 4:10. Prince Turki, if we look over the last 10, 15 years, there have been occasionally periods of rapprochement between Iran and GCC or Saudi Arabia, but long periods of tension. And certainly since 2003, U.S. policy in the region vis-à-vis Iraq and then vis-à-vis Iran and so on changed the balance of power, created new tensions, created new realities on the ground. And yet now we have the beginnings of a potential change in that dynamic with the interim agreement between the P5+1 and Iran, which Saudi Arabia officially and tentatively welcomed as potentially a positive step. If indeed this is an opening, with a new president in Iran and new conditions, what could the GCC states, Saudi Arabia, how do they see a rapprochement with Iran? How deep would it be? What would it feel like? And given that the realities in the region have changed, whether in Syria or in Iraq and so on, what would, if this rapprochement proceeded, what would be the parameters of such a new and a much improved relationship? How might that impact Geneva? How might that impact Iraq? How would you envision it if it were to come to be?
First of all, let me respond to Mr. Perthes about Saudi Arabia pushing sectarianism in the Syrian conflict. As he rightly said, I disagree with him. And Saudi Arabia worked with the Assad regime for many years without any consideration for sect or ethnicity. And to accuse Saudi Arabia of fomenting this issue that is happening on the ground, I think is mistaken. And Dr. Perthes should review his sources of information on that. As he should review his sources on the information about GCC and Saudi fears of rapprochement between the West and Iran. Saudi Arabia and the GCC countries have welcomed the agreement in Geneva, but we consider it a first step. Our continued call for the Middle East is to be free of weapons of mass destruction. And that comprehensive solution, I think, is still some ways off. So as I said in my presentation, we're not going to applaud until we see that happening. And if the P5+1 were to become the P5+2, including the GCC to the table of negotiations with Iran, that would be a step in the right place to make this issue more of a regional as well as an international one. So far, people are crossing over us without taking permission for a use of our airspace. And so we have to bring them down to reality that it is us who are immediately concerned about this issue. Iran is a geographic neighbor, as Dr. Mousavian mentioned this morning, and it's going to be there forever. And we have had, as you correctly said, ups and downs with Iran. More recently, and to cut the issue short, when President Rouhani was elected, King Abdullah, as I mentioned in my presentation, sent him a telegram of congratulations and expressing the hope for improved relations. President Rouhani, to give him credit, even during the election, was calling for improvement of relations with Saudi Arabia. But what we need today is not more rhetoric. We need action on the ground. We need to see Iran remove Revolutionary Guards from Syria. We need to see Iran telling Hezbollah, mind your business, go back to Lebanon, don't interfere in Syria. We need Iran to say to the Abbas Brigade from Iraq, go back to Iraq, don't cross the border into Syria. These are tangible and doable things for Iran to do in order, as Dr. Mousavian wanted to say this morning and did say so, to improve relations with the regional countries. The Gulf states, since even the very bloody conflict between Iran and Iraq in the 80s, was never inimical on its own initiative towards Iran. It was all mostly responsive to Iranian actions or misactions, even during that conflict, and subsequently have called on Iran to engage and to deal with the issue of the Emirati Islands. They refuse to talk about it, simply ignoring that there is such a thing as international law, as international agreements, as an international court of justice, etc., etc. And I agree with Dr. Mousavian this morning that Iran is a big country. It's a country of nearly 80 million people with huge economic and natural resources. As a country of that size and that potential power, it should be a friendly country and not take on a pugilist stance towards its neighbors. This is, I think, something for the Iranian people to decide. It is not for me. But it is also for the Arab countries in the Middle East and in the Gulf particularly, that they have continually extended their hand to Iran in friendship. And in many cases, that hand was not taken up by Iran.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for your patience. Now is the time for a Q&A. Mr. Mousavian, since you've been mentioned. Quick response.
You mentioned since the early revolution, Iran intervened in Arab countries' affairs. Just some months after revolution, an Arab country invaded Iran. Saudi Arabia, GCC, supported with over $100 billion for invasion of Iran. Over 1 million Iranians, they were killed by Saudi and GCC monies. Saddam attacked Iran by chemical weapons. 100,000 Iranians, they were killed, and Saudi supported. It was invasion by an Arab country just right after revolution. Okay, after 15 years of disputes, I was the one mandated by President Rafsanjani, came to Jeddah, 3-4 days with Emir Abdullah. We managed a comprehensive package. Then Dr. Rouhani came to Jeddah. We signed the security pact. All security assurances. It is in the security pact. But now, everybody can see in WikiLeaks that since 2005, Saudi Arabia, GCC, pushed the US and Europe to attack Iran. Military strike against Iran. You cannot deny the WikiLeaks. It is fact. All my European friends, they have told me for many years that the pressure from Saudi Arabia to attack Iran is more than Israel. Why you violated the security pact we signed? What we did after 1998? I mean, for 30 years, either the first decade, invasion by Arab country, supported by Saudi Arabia, $600 billion damage to Iran, or after the next decades, again pushing the US and Europe to attack Iran, and then you are blaming Iran now. On disputes, border disputes with Emirate, this is something related to Shah period. You know this is not created after revolution. But Saudi Arabia has more border dispute with its GCC neighbors, more than Iran with, but you didn't mention any border disputes you have with your neighbors. On Egypt, everyone knows Mubarak was a dictator, corrupted. And I'm sure you would not deny that you supported Mubarak up to the last minute against the will of Egyptian nation. Whether we want to call it Arab Spring or revolution. The people, they were in Tahrir Square, and you were confronting the will of Egyptians, supporting Mubarak. Then they had an election. Morsi was elected, my brother. It was a free election. Then Saudi Arabia supported a military coup against elected president. Now the many Ikhwan al-Muslimin, they are in prison, and you are supporting the military. It was Iran really interfered in Egyptian? Syria, you are right, you had very good relation with Assad. I fully agree with you. Assad made a big mistake for mistreating the demonstrations. It was peaceful demonstration. He made a big mistake for violence. But Bahrain did the same. Overwhelming majority of people in Bahrain, they are Shia. Also, they mistreated the peaceful demonstration. The people in the streets of Bahrain, they were killed. You are supporting Bahrain. You are blaming Assad.
Can I answer, or you want to go on for another minute?
I just wanted to say, believe it or not, if you're going to go to complaints, Iranians, they have more complaint because Iranians, they have never invaded any country. And Arabs, they have invaded Iran.
Can I answer you now?
Could you hold for a moment? Let me get another few questions. That'll give you a chance to put together a response. Hands, please, among young leaders in particular. I'm told to look for young leaders. Are you a young leader? Yes, go ahead then.
You can consider me like this. Thank you. My name is Dima Tarhini. I'm a journalist in DWTV. I have a question to you, Prince. I want your opinion about Geneva II. I know that you spoke already about Syria and the crisis there, but I want your opinion about what kind of result we are going to have in Geneva II, especially that right now the solution for the Syria crisis, it's not in the hand of the Syrians, we all know that, it's in the hand of other countries. And what kind of role the Saudi Arabia is going to play in the future in the whole talk and negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other hands? In the back there. Dr. Samir.
Samir Al-Taki from Syria. My question is regarding any possibility for a regional consortium that would gather regional powers regarding Syria. Because at the end of the day, anybody who's thinking that he can get any stake from the Syrian situation is completely wrong. I think all they can get is not more than Hemingway's fish, The Old Man and the Sea. They will get the skeleton. And what we are seeing is that this fish is now becoming more and more infected and more disintegrated, and it will spill over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Samir. Any other? Well, let me turn to our panel. I believe, Prince Turki, there were some questions.
Again, like I disagreed with Dr. Perthes, I disagree with you, sir. And I refer to the Iraq War. If you remember when Saddam invaded Iraq, there was no question that Saddam invaded Iraq. Invaded Iran in September 1980, was it, or 81?
80.
King Fahd told him directly he shouldn't. He should withdraw his forces from Iran. And for the first 2 years, when Saddam, in his pride and glory, attempted to militarily conquer Iran, there was not one penny given either from Saudi Arabia or from any of the GCC countries to Iraq. When Iran, under Khomeini, drove out the Iraqi forces from Iran, and then declared publicly that they were going to topple Saddam Hussein and take down his rule in Iraq, and started invading across the border into Iraq. That is when Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states began to help Iraq. We were always seeking a withdrawal of forces from both countries in that conflict, and this is the position. If you look at the United Nations or you look at any other international organization, you will see that Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries were always for a stopping of the fighting between Iraq and Iran. You talk about President Mubarak. Saudi Arabia has no inhibitions about telling everybody that when you have friends in power, friends who have stood with you, friends who helped you militarily and otherwise, remember the invasion of Iraq, invasion of Kuwait by Iraq. Egypt was a faithful ally that sent its troops to die on the front with their fellow Arabs and other international friends to liberate Kuwait. The kingdom stood by Saddam, by Mubarak, until the process of resignation and voting in an election that removed the power of Mubarak took place, and then we extended our hand of friendship to the people who succeeded Mubarak in that conflict. We have no inhibitions of standing with our friends. We don't designate them as dictators or as liberals or as Muslim Brotherhood or as whatever you want to call it. Those who stood by us, we will stand by them. And the other issue, of course, that you mentioned is on Syria. And there you say Iran has not invaded any other country. What are your revolutionary troops doing in Syria? They're there for a stroll, to visit the sites in Hamas and Hama and Halab and other places in Syria? No. They're there to help Assad kill his people. And that is where Iran, I think, should need to withdraw its interference from Arab affairs. And to compare Bahrain to Syria, I think, is like comparing what? Comparing a plate of butter with a plate of jam. And the situation in Bahrain is in negotiation with those who are claiming to represent the so-called Shia majority in Bahrain, and the government, and the other forces in Bahrain. And so that is where Iran can be helpful, first of all, by stopping any statements coming to say that Bahrain is I 18th or 32nd province of Iran. By stopping the propaganda broadcasts that are beamed on a daily basis from Iranian television and Iranian radio against Bahrain and against the other Arab countries. These are just a few of the things that Iran can do to help improve the relationship with our neighbors. And as I said, we're neighbors. We're going to remain neighbors forever. Let's get over this issue by concrete steps, not just by verbal announcements on that issue. Was there any other part of the question I didn't answer?
No, I think that covers the gist of it. Thank you. Okay. Before closing...
There was a question of the young lady, I think, about Geneva too.
Sorry, yes.
I am not in the government loop, so I don't know what the contacts between various governments take. I read the papers and I read reports that you and others in your profession make, and frankly, I'm not optimistic about Geneva 2. Geneva 1 didn't leave, in my view, much to build on for Geneva 2. And as I said, for Russia to be now playing an arbiter's role in this issue while supplying the Assad regime with all of the weaponry and the other logistical and advice support, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I don't see how a deal that is being brokered by a side helping one of the sides in that deal is going to succeed.
Thank you, sir. If there are no more questions, any final comments any of my other panelists would like to make? Volker?
Yeah, since my friend Turki Al-Faisal and I already agreed to disagree on some points, I think I should also say that there are some very strong points where I disagree with my friend Hussein Mousavian, and it seems that Turki and myself can agree on Iran, and Hussein and myself can agree on Saudi Arabia in a certain way. I would maintain, Prince Turki, that not wise people like yourself, but a lot of people in Saudi Arabia are breeding and fostering a sectarian discourse which is migrating over the borders of Saudi Arabia. We are having Sunni sheikhs in Saudi Arabia speaking about building up a Sunni front against the Alawites and the Shiites, still denouncing the Shiites wherever there are as heretics, as al-Rafida, and that is coming out of Saudi Arabia. You may say it is coming from Saudi civil society and not from the Saudi government, but it is coming out of... Good, then we would even agree. I also think that...
the official position of the kingdom is definitely against sectarian divisions.
Good.
King Abdullah at the last Islamic Summit conference in Mecca called for sectarian dialogue and the establishment of a center for that purpose in the holy city of Medina.
Yes.
And it is in the process of being built there for that purpose.
Let's Volker finish, and we're almost out of time.
Yes,
so.
this is good, but you know and I know that countries are unfortunately also made responsible for the rest of the population and not only for their monarchs and
Indeed,
leaders.
then you should hold Iran for what comes of Shia sheikhs as well against the Sunnis.
I'm coming to Iran. Hussein, I want to briefly comment on something which you said in the first panel today, because I think in the discourse here about Syria and how to solve the war there, it is important. You said that Hezbollah or Iranian Revolutionary Guards are fighting in Syria to fight terrorism. And I think that is, with all friendship, rather outrageous to say. Hezbollah and the Revolutionary Guards and the Iraqi brigade supported by Iran are there to prolong the life of Bashar al-Assad and his regime. And we know...
His phone disagrees with him.
No, my phone is off, but I can lay it aside. Maybe someone is misusing it. That happens in this country.
It's the NSA, you know.
We know and you know that Hezbollah and the Revolutionary Guards are fighting there in order to prolong the life of Bashar al-Assad, and it and he wouldn't have won some of the battles if he hadn't had Hezbollah on his side and the Revolutionary Guards on his side. And here I come back to say, how do we solve this enigma in the Levant? By stopping the war in Syria and not by prolonging it through supporting Bashar al-Assad and his regime. Let us take the foreign fighters out. Let us bring everybody to Geneva. If we take the foreign fighters out, if we even get ceasefires, this will weaken the extremists. The more we send foreign fighters in to support Bashar al-Assad, the more we are breeding extremists and causing the reasons that make so many people in Syria afraid of a change, of transition. So help us to convince the new rational government in Iran to stop that support for Bashar al-Assad.
Prime Minister Jebali, last word, and then Bassma, last word, but quick بسرعة لأن الوقت تقريبا.
But please keep it quick because we're out of time. A quick remark, with all due respect to my colleagues and your guests, this is only a sign of how dangerous polarization, ideological polarization is. How dangerous foreign interference in our countries is, and interference in our countries' destinies. I heard a lot about the will of the people. What do the different peoples want? Simply, they want development, they want prosperity, they want freedom, and they want democracy. This is the demand of the peoples, and this is the demand directed at Europe. And we are all here today in a forum on foreign policy, on German and European foreign policy in our region. We demand the support of every political effort in order to establish democracy and thus, and in parallel to that, supporting democracies as you did in Eastern Europe. We don't want more problems and complications. And personally, even though I am the General Secretary of a so-called Islamist party, I rejected these names. I reject calling parties Islamist or religious parties or Shiite or any. We are parties aiming at building communities and societies while keeping our identities, which is the common denominator between us all. And we should not be in conflict upon or because of these identities. If we lose our identity, we will fade away. So hopefully, let's look at our priorities. Let's look at our priority needs in development and democracy. And thank you again for your hospitality so much.
I do want to highlight one risk that we are seeing behind words. The word secularism in our region is one that has been used as a cover for sectarian rule or for authoritarian rule. Again, we see today that in Egypt, it is going to cover authoritarianism again with this label of secular groups, liberal groups. These are not democrats. Same when we hear we want a secular Syria. A secular Syria is not about protecting the Christians alone or protecting the Alawis alone. And when I hear sometimes some Iranians say, we want a secular Syria. I'm sorry, you're not looking for a secular Syria if you are helping a regime like this one. But likewise, I want to say, Syria will only be one piece if it is democratic. It cannot be Islamist either. Even moderate Islamist is not going to work. I, as a Syrian and as a Sunni Muslim, if I need to say that, cannot tell a Christian or an Alawi Syrian that it's okay, we will have Sharia, but don't worry, it will work out. I cannot say that. What works in other countries, what can be tried in other countries, will not work in Syria. And I think that is is at the center of what Russia says, Europe says about the Christians of Syria. They want a secular rule. Secular is not the right word because it has covered too many horrible things, and it continues to do so. It covers chemical weapons, I'm sorry to say, use of chemical weapons. So let's ban these names. We used nationalism in the past and we killed it because of authoritarianism. We're doing the same with the notion of secularism. The only word that suits this region is democracy. And Syria as a democratic country, or no Syria. And finally, I feel very disturbed by my friend Volker, who I usually agree with. This administrative distribution or de facto split between a part of Syria that will be governed by Assad and a part that will be governed by the opposition. We've had a recipe for bringing about disaster to this country by this regime. It is by objective factors, everything we've documented over the 2.5 years that passed is this is a war criminal. We have a family that needs to be tried in a tribunal. So can we move to identify and say and call things by their names and not look for arrangements that would keep monstrous figures in the landscape? Thank you.
Thank you, Bassma. Thank everybody on the panel. Very rich one indeed. Thank you for your patience. We go for a break now.